What's going on, everybody? Jacked Up Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. The big topic in the sports world, the college football playoff 12-team field is set, and we're going to discuss each and every matchup who I think is going to win the college football playoff national championship here in a couple of weeks. But first, we're going to start and talk about this 12-team field. And for the first time, it seems like since the college football playoff was founded, the committee gets it right. You know, there was a giant debate going into Sunday whether or not that final team would be SMU or Alabama. And part of me, probably a significant chunk of me on Sunday watching that selection show was, yeah, Alabama's going to get in over SMU and it's going to cause this giant uproar. But that's just the way the cookie has crumbled in favor of the SEC for years. It's not necessarily what I think should have happened, but it's what I thought was going to happen. And guess what? The committee did the smart thing. The committee put the more deserving team in the 12-team field, that being SMU, that being the team that's now what? 11-2 and is in the college football playoff, lost its conference championship game, but was a better team than Alabama. And frankly, I would even go as far as saying that Alabama would probably lose to SMU in a game. Like if the two teams were to play. The biggest thing about the Alabama versus SMU debate in the lead up to the college football playoff was Alabama's strength of schedule versus SMU's strength of schedule. And while maybe Alabama played a tougher schedule on paper because the SEC is a better league naturally than the ACC is, I mean, you look at Alabama's two losses to Oklahoma and to Vanderbilt in the conference. Both of those teams are 500. Both of those teams are as mediocre gets when it comes to college football in 2024. They lose by 5 to Vanderbilt, and they lose by what? 3 touchdowns to Oklahoma. So to me, I'd like to think that was the reason why SMU got in over Alabama. SMU's got the better resume. I mean, I can't take credit for this take. I can't. But I will say it anyway because I think it makes a lot of sense. So, and it's just a total maybe conspiracy theory type of idea, but I think it's worth pondering. So I was driving home from work Monday night, yesterday, and I was listening to the Infinity Sports Network national sports talk radio. And there was a caller into one of the shows, the late night shows, and his theory on why SMU got in over Alabama. If you look at the bracket, and ESPN and ABC have the exclusive rights to the college football playoff, all of the quarterfinal games, semifinal games, and national championship are on ESPN. But there are 2 first-round games, which we'll get into all that in a little bit, on TNT/Max. But if you look at ESPN ABC, right, the exclusive rights holder, all that good stuff, they're in it with the college football playoff. I mean, there's got to be some overlap. And you ask yourself the question, who are the 3 biggest television schools in the country? Who are the 3 biggest schools in college football when it comes to television? Alabama is one of them, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. So this caller's point was the way the bracket shook out and the way that the seeds went the way they did because they had to. You've got Ohio State and Notre Dame in quarterfinal matchups. There is 1 playoff game on Friday, the 20th of December, 3 on Saturday. The 3 on Saturday are at noon, 4, and primetime 8 o'clock, and the one on Friday is 8 o'clock. And ABC and ESPN have the primetime matchups on Friday and on Saturday because, again, they are the exclusive home for the college football playoff. Who's in the primetime game on Friday night on ABC? Notre Dame. One of those 3 big TV schools when it comes to college football. Who's in the primetime game on Saturday night? The Buckeyes of Ohio State. So you've got big-time TV school in primetime on Friday night in Notre Dame, big-time TV school in primetime on Saturday night in Ohio State. Does the college football playoff need Alabama at that point? No. No, they don't. And you don't really have a whole lot of say in the SMU Penn State matchup, which is the one that's on TNT and Max because that's away from your network. But that's still a pretty darn good matchup because Penn State's got a massive alumni base. 110,000 people go to those games. And SMU's in the heart of Dallas. Like that, they will draw a crowd and they come from a big market. And then the same can be said for Clemson and Texas, 2 pretty relevant college football powers in the country. Big time school in Texas. Clemson won a national championship less than a decade ago. They've got their bases covered. And they didn't need Alabama this time. Interesting take. Not necessarily sure that I agree with all of it. Just one of the more intelligent phone conversations I've heard between a caller into a show and a show host in a really long time. And that's coming from somebody that gets to do that from time to time nowadays. But I thought it was an interesting take. I think a sliver of that played into it. But I also think a big chunk of it was what we talked about in the beginning. SMU's just got the better resume. And they're the 11th seed. They're in. Alabama's out. Alabama's got to play the team up north in a stupid bowl game. Like, I don't really even know what else to call them. And I'm really excited. I'm stoked for this 12-team college football playoff. I think that there are a couple of games in the first round matchup. We'll get into this in a little bit. And then we'll get into some potential quarterfinal and semifinal pairings that I think could have the potential to be generational type football games. I'm excited to sit my rear end down on the couch when I have time to and watch these games and just bask in the glory of a 12-team college football playoff. Now, with that comes the de-emphasis of other bowl games. Because you've got the Peach Bowl, the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, and the Sugar Bowl are the quarterfinal matchups. And then the Cotton Bowl and the Orange Bowl are the semifinal matchups. So the New Year's Six bowls and the bowl names that have stuck around for decades now, the bigger bowls, they're not your traditional big-time bowl games that if you don't make, the 4-team playoff or the national championship back when the BCS was just 1 versus 2, like, you still get a pretty darn good bowl game on New Year's Day if it's the Rose Bowl, or New Year's Eve if it's the Fiesta Bowl or the Orange Bowl or whatever. Now they're all lumped into the college football playoff, and they'll rotate as far as what are the semifinal matchups versus what are the quarterfinal matchups on a yearly basis. But now, like, if you don't make the 12-team field, what's the best bowl game you can make? The Gator Bowl? The Holiday Bowl? I'm truthfully grasping at straws. I only know the 2 bowl games off by heart that we'll talk about in a second that aren't affiliated with the college football playoff because they've got some local interest in them. I don't even know any of the names anymore. I mean, they change year in and year out. And the only one that I think that drew my attention was the Pop-Tart Bowl. I love Pop-Tarts, by the way. Pop-Tarts are an elite breakfast pastry / snack food. We can get into a whole lot of that sometime in the future. But if you look at the bowl schedule up and down, like on paper, I mean, Alabama's the 11th ranked team in the CFP rankings. They should take care of business against Michigan. Not a whole lot of other matchups intrigue me, except Iowa State and Miami, which is the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Cyclones 18th, Hurricanes 13th. So there's a ranked matchup there. Other than that, man, the bowl matchups stink. They're awful. They're absolutely terrible. Again, with the exception of the first round matchups in the college football playoff, I'm looking at this schedule and nothing jumps off the page of exciting by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe BYU and Colorado in the Alamo Bowl, which I find odd because both of those teams are in the Big 12. I wasn't sure you were able to do that. But again, with everything changing because of 12 teams in the playoff, I guess you can do whatever the hell you want. That should be an intriguing matchup on paper. Again, I think Alabama will take care of business against Michigan. And then again, that's it. I didn't even look at any of the names. The only two that I know off by heart are the Scooters Coffee Frisco Bowl. That is a week from today, the 17th of December, one of the early matchups. It'll be the third bowl game of the slate. It's West Virginia and it's Memphis. Will the Mountaineers have a new head coach by then? My guess is yes. If you watched the last episode of Jacked Up, we talked with West Virginia Sports Now managing editor and beat writer Mike Oste, who talked about the search. And it seems to have heated up a little bit. Mike, got to give him a hell of a lot of credit. He broke the news that Andy Kotelnicki was initially going to be interviewed for the job, the Penn State offensive coordinator, and he was on that the whole way. Now, it seems like Kotelnicki has taken his name out of the running for that job. And Rich Rodriguez's name is being floated around there. Anthony Becht, former Mountaineer coaching in the USFL, and Jeff Monken, the coach at Army. Those are the three names right now that are being tossed around, at least I think, with the most traction. Kotelnicki, it seems like from all the reports that I've read, that was Ren Baker's number one choice. And it would have been his job if he wanted it. Now it seems like Kotelnicki is not in love with the idea of leaving Penn State before the college football playoff starts. Because I think West Virginia will have a head coach named by the bowl game. That's in 1 week. I mean, you look at some of the time frame. As growing up a Pitt fan, I was in the midst of a bunch of head coaching changes, and they all seem to happen right around the middle of December. And they all seem to have happened right around the time before these college football playoff games start. A couple of jobs have already changed hands. Tony Gibson's going to Marshall. Charles Huff left Marshall to go to Southern Miss. So those are already been announced. I don't think Andy Kotelnicki was in love with the idea of leaving Penn State and committing to leave Penn State before the playoffs started. And maybe their path to a potential national championship game played into the factor of that. We'll talk about that in a moment. So it seems like Andy Kotelnicki out of the running. They'll probably have a new head coach by the bowl game. The Mountaineers take on Memphis in the Scooters Coffee Frisco Bowl Tuesday, 1 week from today at 9 p.m. So next week's Jacked Up, we can look into the bowl game a little bit, perhaps bring Mike back aboard the program and talk about who they hired as the next head coach. So stay tuned for that. And then on December 26th, the day after Christmas in Motown, Detroit, Michigan, the Game Above Sports Bowl, Pitt and Toledo. Again, you know me. You know I'm a Pitt guy. I don't really care about this game. I hate to say it. As a Pitt fan and as somebody who's loved the University of Pittsburgh and its athletic programs since they were a small child, I am a hell of a lot more invested right now in the basketball program that's ranked in the top 25 and the women's volleyball program that will probably be in a third consecutive volleyball Final Four and have a pretty damn good chance of winning a national championship. So guess what? I don't care about this bowl game. Eli Holstein, hurt, probably won't come back for this game. At least I doubt it. Same with Desmond Reed. They're going to be without two of their best offensive players more than likely. We're moving. Do that from time to time. I apologize. You're going to have a backup quarterback, a third-string walk-on quarterback probably starting in this game if you're Pitt. Because Nate Yarnell, the guy that, tried to beat Clemson at home and played valiantly in that game and has had a pretty rough shake at it as his tenure of a quarterback at Pitt, but he enters the transfer portal. So he's not going to be there. David Lynch is going to be Pitt's quarterback in this game against a team from the MAC in Toledo. And I'll tell you what, Like I said, I'm more invested in Pitt volleyball right now. I'm more invested in Pitt basketball right now. If it was a game against, a power four opponent, okay, yeah, maybe I'll tune in and I'll spark some interest. I don't really care that Pitt is playing against Toledo in a bowl game. I probably won't even watch. December 26th, sports director Rob Metzger will be off on his Christmas holiday. What day of the week is that? It's a Thursday. I'll be working at 7 o'clock anyway, putting Sportscast together for News 9 at 10 on Fox 9, News 9 tonight. I probably won't even tune in because the way it works in our sports office, we only get the TV that we have. We only get the games on the analog. So NBC, ABC, CBS, and NBC. So if I want to watch a game that's on ESPN or another, platform of that nature, I got to log in on my computer, log into the cable account, fire it up on the computer streaming. I'm not going to those lengths. Sorry. So that's the Game Above Sports Bowl in Ford Field in Detroit. Cool venue, but that's about it. Pitt and Toledo on the. Oh my goodness, I didn't even see. Goes to show you, I'm not even paying attention. It starts at 2 o'clock, so I'll be putting the sportscast together for the 6 o'clock show. And I might watch it. I'll be a little less busy at that time. All right, 12-team playoff field before we wrap it up. Let's go down the line. We'll start at the top of the bracket. Clemson and Texas. This is a matchup that I think could potentially be the most lopsided in the first round games. I think Texas has a pretty darn good shot of getting to the national championship as a 5 seed. And a lot of talk about these playoff formats and brackets as they were released, and now the final one's out, obviously, was the best spots to be in were 5 and 6. Yeah, you got to play an extra game. You don't get that first round bye, but you get that game at home. Like Austin, Texas, Columbus, State College, and South Bend are going to be off the chains, electrifying as hell, perhaps more electrifying than any of those 4 venues have ever been before, ever. And if you're a Buckeye fan watching this and you can think of a couple of games against Michigan that were pretty crazy, I mean, this is a playoff game. You lose and you go home. That has never happened before in college football in your own stadium. And if you think I'm crazy by saying that, and if you've been to a Steelers playoff game, it's a Browns playoff game, but you haven't because they haven't hosted one, or a Bengals playoff game at home, it's pretty damn electric. This is going to be higher. I like Texas over Clemson. We'll get to Ohio State. I'll do them last. SMU and Penn State. Look, Penn State's got the best path to that January 20th national championship. I think SMU's talented. I mean, I watched them beat up on my Panthers pretty bad. But this game's in State College. There's going to be 110 plus thousand people in the stadium. Whiteout night game, or noon game, I should say. A complete, just absolute advantage for Penn State. And SMU is going to be overwhelmed. And I like the way that Drew Aller fought in that Big Ten championship against Oregon. That defense can potentially be very tough. Now, I think Oregon's really, really good. We'll get to them in a moment. But I think this is Penn State's opportunity here to win and potentially save James Franklin's job. Indiana, Notre Dame. Look, Kurt Cignetti's put together a hell of a season. Cool matchup in state. Indiana at Notre Dame and South Bend at night. But Notre Dame, I love the way they're playing. Marcus Freeman's got those guys humming. Marcus Freeman's a guy that's been thrown around for NFL jobs, and rightfully so. I think he's a damn good coach, and I think Notre Dame beats Indiana pretty handedly. It's either going to be that or the Clemson-Texas game that I think will be the most lopsided. Ohio State and Tennessee. You know, I said James Franklin might be coaching for his job against SMU. Ryan Day, I think, is almost certainly coaching for his job against Tennessee. You lose to Michigan at home, a team that won 7 games and frankly stunk by Michigan standards, in a game that you absolutely cannot lose, 4th year in a row, by the way. And you follow that up by losing a first-round college football playoff game at home to a team that, at least on paper, I think you're better than. Yeah, I don't see a way that Ryan Day keeps his job if Tennessee's able to win, but I don't think they're able to win. I think Ohio State takes care of business at home in the second half. Will Howard, the run game, settles in against the Volunteers. Give me the Buckeyes, but I don't think if you're an Ohio State fan watching this, I don't think it'll be a comfortable watch. I think it might be one of those games where Ohio State and Tennessee are separated by 3 or 6 points throughout. And then maybe halfway through the fourth quarter, Ohio State puts it in 2-possession territory, and you go from there. All right. Texas and Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. 4 versus 5. Look, Arizona State's a cool story. Kenny Dillingham is, I think, an exciting young coach in this thing, and will have Arizona State competitive in a Big 12 that's wide open, and I think will be wide open for a very long time. But Texas is really good. I mean, Arch Manning and that receiver, I'm sorry, Quinn Ewers with Arch Manning sprinkled in there, and that receiving core, I think they take care of business. I think this will be a potential lopsided affair. Texas cruises to the Cotton Bowl Classic and the CFP semifinals. Tennessee, or rather Ohio State and Oregon, Buckeye fans, I'm sorry. I'm picking the Ducks to win the whole thing. I think Dylan Gabriel, if it weren't for Travis Hunter being a two-way star, or if it weren't for Ashton Genty running for 2,500 yards this season, I think Dylan Gabriel would win the Heisman in any other year. He's phenomenal. That team's phenomenal. Dan Lanning, I think, is the best coach in college football, period. Give me the Ducks over the Buckeyes, and it'll be Texas and Oregon in the semifinal. Penn State and Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. The only thing I think that has Boise State going for it in this game is that it's the Fiesta Bowl, and they've got some history there, some pretty incredible history with the Broncos in the Fiesta Bowl. And of course, Ashton Genty, best running back in college football. But that Penn State defense is the best I think that Genty has seen all season. I mean, he ran for a bunch of yards against Oregon earlier in the year, but that Penn State defense is nuts. And I think it'll be a close game, but I think the Nittany Lions get to the Orange Bowl in the semifinal. And then Notre Dame, Georgia, give me the Bulldogs. I think the Bulldogs are the second best team in the country, believe it or not. And even if Carson Beck isn't able to go in this one, I still think that defense and the supporting cast can get it done. And Kirby Smart's been there, done that. So give me Georgia. Boise State, or Penn State and Georgia. This is where I think the Nittany Lions' luck runs out, but not necessarily in blowout fashion. I think Drew Aller by this point is going to keep them rolling, keep them humming, and they keep it relatively competitive. I see Georgia beating Penn State by 10 to 13 points. Now, I put out a predictor graphic or a predictor tweet on Sunday, and I had Penn State over Notre Dame. I slept on it. I'm picking Georgia over Notre Dame and Georgia to get to the national championship. I have a hard time picking against the number 2 Bulldogs and Kirby Smart. Until Oregon beats Texas in what I think is one of the most classic college football games anybody in my age range has ever seen. You know, I vaguely remember that national championship with Vince Young in Texas and Pete Carroll, Matt Leinart, and USC back in 2006, and how incredible that game was. I think this one has the potential to be just as good. Quinn Ewers, high-flying Texas offense. Oregon, high-flying offense. I think it could be a shootout and one of the best games we see all year, but I think Oregon wins by 3 to 7 points. They're in the national championship against Georgia. Good game, not as good as Oregon, Texas. And I think the Ducks win it all. Like I said, Dylan Gabriel, best quarterback in the country. Dan Lanning, best coach in the country. I have a hard time picking against them. Let me know what you think. Hit me up on Twitter at JackWTOV9. Comment below, either if you're watching it on Facebook or YouTube. Let me know who you like in the CFP. Let me know if you're a Buckeyes fan, how you think the Bucks will fare. Let me know who you guys have winning it all. It's Jacked Up with yours truly on December 10th. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you next week. Will West Virginia have a new head coach next week? We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Until then, be well. We'll see you soon.